Hello, my name's Sharon Mara, and I'm the Deputy Director for Operations for the Savannah River National Laboratory. The Savannah River National Laboratory, for decades, has assisted the Department of Energy in developing environmental cleanup technologies and remediation strategies. The expertise of the Savannah River National Laboratory is a valuable resource for leading the nation to new, clean, safe, secure methods of obtaining energy sources. In particular, hydrogen, which is central to SRNL's history, is proving to have tremendous potential for providing energy for our vehicles, our homes, and industries.
Hello, my name is Sue Clark, and I'm the Deputy Lab Director for Science and Technology at the Savannah River National Lab. Earth Day is when we celebrate global efforts to protect the environment and focus on conservation of energy and our ecosystems. Bringing together people with expertise across a wide range of scientific and engineering disciplines, SRNL is leading the nation to new, clean, safe, secure methods of producing energy. As you celebrate Earth Day, think about how you can do your part today with the energy choices that you make, and consider the positive impact you can have on joining the race to innovate a new sustainable energy economy for everyone on our planet.
All right. Hi, I'm Brian Viner. I am from the Savannah River National Laboratory, 10 years. And a lot of the area I'm focused on have been really understanding how it interacts with the atmosphere. And there's a lot of really interesting stuff that goes on there. I've spent a lot of time working in the forest. And so, with that, I think we have a video that we're going to start with.
The AmeriFlux network measures carbon dioxide, water, and energy fluxes in the North, Central, and South American ecosystems. Funded by the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Science, the grassroots investigator-driven network includes more than 110 sites and contributes to important ecological and atmospheric climate research. In South Carolina, Savannah River National Laboratory's Atmospheric Technologies Group plays a vital scientific role in this network by collecting and analyzing data in and around DOE's Savannah River site.
At SRNL, we are performing carbon cycle research aimed at analyzing how the forests that stretch across the SRS are taking up carbon and then respiring it. Specifically, we are looking at how disturbance will affect the carbon cycle.
Through the burning of fossil fuels and deforestation, there's a global imbalance in the carbon cycle, resulting in global warming and climate change. Researchers believe carbon sequestration inside forested carbon sinks may help reduce this imbalance.
A carbon sink describes an environment that is taking in more carbon than it is releasing back to the atmosphere.
During photosynthesis, trees and plants sequester or absorb carbon from the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide, using it as food.
We see a cycle of carbon that is being absorbed through the day as trees are photosynthesizing and growing. And then at night, when the stomata on the vegetation close, we do see a small release of carbon back to the environment.
So SRS provides a really nice environment to study carbon dynamics because we have such extensive forests across the site that it's really an undisturbed environment. It's a very pristine environment for examining carbon cycle.
SRNL helps maintain instrumentation at two towers. One is the Aiken AmeriFlux Tower located on SRS. The second tower allows us to put instruments up to 330 meters off the ground and gives us more of a landscape representation of what the carbon cycle looks like.
SRNL instrumentation collects detailed multi-level measurements for carbon and water vapor fluxes, soil moisture measurements, and methane, in addition to assisting the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Trace Gas Sampling Program. Sonic anemometers, which look like claws, measure turbulent fluctuations in wind and temperature, and glycor sensors analyze carbon dioxide and water vapor concentrations.
So this is a Lightcore 7500 instrument, and this is the primary instrument we use on site to measure carbon fluxes. It works by emitting an infrared laser from one end to the other, and based on the attenuation of that laser in the atmosphere, we are able to assess how much CO2 and how much water vapor is in the atmosphere. And we're doing that 10 times a second. So that way we know how quickly is carbon either leaving the forest or how quickly is it being taken up by the forest.
Beyond AmeriFlux research, SRNL collaborates with the University of Georgia's Savannah River Ecology Laboratory, the University of Alabama, and the U.S. Forest Service to develop strategies for managing the forest understory to help improve carbon sequestration. By accumulating and studying substantial amounts of data over a long period of time, experts are able to gain a clearer understanding of our ecosystems. This collected data provides a unique opportunity for advances in global climate models, improved climate change forecasting, and ultimately enhanced shared knowledge between a vast network of international partners working together to further our scientific understanding of a complex climate.
What I love about this work is being able to get out into nature and see the environments that we're trying to model and where we're putting this data to work. And it's wonderful to be able to get up here and get this high-level view where you can see out over the trees and see how the forest structure is arranged and what that could mean as we make changes to it going forward.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brian Looney. I work with Brian and others at Savannah River. I guess celebrating Earth Day today. By my calculation, this is the 53rd Earth Day. And just to tell you, people have been relating stories all day about how they have gotten into science and what it means to them. I organized the Earth Day events at my high school in 1973 and 1974. That would have been the 4th and 5th Earth Days, and really have dedicated my life ever since to science. And I'm thrilled to be in the National Laboratory System, working and collaborating with all the folks. We're going to show just one more quick video and then open things up for discussion. But this video is changing gears a little bit, and it's what we can do to kind of understand how energy development, how we affect our environment in terms of contaminants. And fossil fuels like coal release a lot of mercury, cause mercury contamination in streams and ultimately in fish. This video goes into that. And the other thing that you'll see on this video, which I think is really interesting, is we have a lot of young people and students who I've been working with through the last several years. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to our moderator and let her start this video.
Researchers at Savannah River National Laboratory have developed new reactive diffusive gradient samplers and microcolumns to differentiate mercury species. Sponsored by DOE's Environmental Management Office of Technology Development, these technologies incorporate targeted chemical reactions to differentiate key mercury species, while reducing analytical cost from about $1,000 to $100 per sample. Mercury contamination is the primary reason for fish consumption advisories in all 50 states. High mercury concentrations are also present inside legacy radioactive waste tanks at DOE complex sites.
It's important to industries all over the country. It's important to environmental agencies. Virtually every outfall in every stream is analyzed for mercury.
Of particular concern is methylmercury, a highly toxic organomercury compound that has the ability to higher concentrations in life than in the water, then biomagnify and become even more toxic as it moves up through the food chain.
What we were trying to do was develop a sampler that would measure the different species of mercury, because for mercury, the species that exists in either waste or the environment is a key to how it behaves, how you can remove it, or its toxicity, how much builds up in fish. The breakthrough of our diffusive gradient samplers and our microcolumns is the innovative use of the reagents for reducing and amalgamating the forms of mercury that we want to take out and leave in the forms of mercury that we want to analyze. So the diffusive gradient sampler has several layers and each has a certain purpose. So there's a filter on the outside that just protects it. Then there's a diffusive zone that controls the rate that mercury accumulates in the sampler. Then there's a collection zone. We've added reagents either to the diffusive zone or the collection zone to basically push mercury around and bend it to our will.
The DGSs were deployed into waterways at Oak Ridge National Laboratory and the Savannah River site. After a specified time, the samples were collected and taken back to SRNL for analysis.
We're looking at the same chemistry in microcolumns because we want to give ourselves the maximum chance of having success and having diverse solutions that come out of the laboratory. So once we got the samples back to the laboratory, the microcolumns would go on to a shaker table. Then we would simply filter out the sorbent that we had put in there.
No matter the species being sampled for, both technologies can utilize a standard total mercury analyzer as the final step. The simple and inexpensive technology has real-world commercial and research applications in environmental monitoring, aquaculture, and equipment manufacturers and suppliers.
So we actually have 2 patents that have been applied for, one for microcolumns and one for diffusive gradient samplers. We've had several companies contact us with some interest in licensing the technology and hopefully widespread use of the technology, not just in DOE, but by others outside DOE. So just as a quick follow-up, for those of you who are students or teachers on the line, you can see a video like that and you probably are thinking of all kinds of really interesting ideas that can come into your mind directly. So for example, the amount of mercury that accumulates in fish is a function of how much is methylmercury. So maybe controlling mercury in fish, we could actually control the amount of methylmercury in the stream by making changes in the ecosystem and things like that. So there's all kinds of really interesting ideas that can grow out of that. So I guess we'll open it up for questions or discussion.
So for both the Bryans, one of the questions that came in is, what is your favorite science podcast? And I'll also add like reading materials. What do you like to read and listen to learn more about your field of work?
I'll go ahead and go first. And I guess first thing I'll have to admit to is I'm not much of a podcast person. I don't really listen to podcasts. I'm a reading person myself. And so some of the favorite things I enjoy reading just in general are some of the things like just Physics Today and Science and Nature, just because there's such a fascinating amount of different research that's going on. And so even if it's not related to the field, it's always just interesting to read that type of stuff. As far as stuff specifically related to, carbon and meteorology in general, I guess there it gets kind of more into the scientific type literature and just understanding even just things like but even just things like newspapers and stuff. There's always interesting stuff when it comes to meteorology. Weather affects everybody's lives, which is why it's so fascinating to me, and it affects them in lots of different ways. Me personally, I've worked in meteorology, I've worked in agronomy, and now I work in nuclear science, which is a field that I never dreamed I'd be in when I started. But it's a fascinating field, and there's a lot to really look at it when it comes to how weather impacts the environment and everything that goes on in it. So,
Awesome.
So I
Can you
can
all
jump
hear me
in.
now? Or
We can hear you
yes,
now.
here you know,
We can
Faith.
hear you now.
all right. So I was just gonna say hello, and I'm Faith from Berkeley National Lab. I'm director of K-12 programs there, but I'm also an Augusta native. So I'm very happy to be on this call with you all because I grew up learning about Savannah River National Laboratory, but I still didn't get to know all of the details of the research at the laboratory. So excited to hear this today. And Brian, Looney, we're going to let you finish that answer of, what are you interested in, or what should people be looking at to give them a better understanding of the work that you do. But then also ask, how long have you been at Savannah River National Laboratory? And, where did you start? You both said you're not where you thought you would be. So where did you start off with your work?
So actually, I can integrate all those together. So I've been here for 39 years at Savannah River. And I implied something earlier, which was I was the lead for Earth Day at my high school when I was a junior and senior in 1973 and 1974. And my life plan was I was really interested in science, and I was really interested in the environment. And I had kind of a decision to make in high school, which was you can just kind of become an activist, or you can maybe learn and get the chops to be part of the solution. And so I decided to kind of become a scientist from an early age and to become an environmental scientist from an early age. And that goes to my answer on the well, I'm old, so not podcasts, but books and articles. So I read a lot of books on kind of environmental science, but I'm also really interested in the history of science. I love to learn about, kind of, what came before and learn and figure out how I can build on that. I love information about kind of like key communities that are developing in science. So I love to read about kind of the development of women in science and things like that. I find that fascinating and pretty exciting. So, it's those kinds of things. The process of science and the scientific method. So those are really the lines of inquiry. And then, of course, as Brian said, he's really interested in meteorology information. I'm really interested in the breadth of environmental information that's out there. So basically, 40 years since my PhD, and been working in the National Laboratory System ever since then.
Awesome. What kind of high school or college courses would you recommend for students interested in your fields?
So I was in one of the first environmental science programs around the country. And I would say look around and find a university that has a program that is aligned with your vision and worldview and kind of core values. So at the time, there were very few environmental science programs, or there was actually only a couple. And my concept was that environmental work is an interdisciplinary science. And so I wanted a program that had the breadth of geology, chemistry, biology, and physics. And so the environmental science program at the university I went to was a blend of those disciplines. And actually had more required hours than any other major at the university because it had so many disciplines involved in it. But it's how I believed you needed to approach environmental work. And so that's why I went to that program. So I would say just look at the different options that are out there and take the courses that fit into kind of your core values.
And on my end, I mean, meteorology tends to require a lot of science and math at its core, but there are so many applications. I teach a course in meteorology, low-level course in meteorology, and there are generally 0 science majors in that course. And one of the first things I do is I challenge them to think about how weather plays a role in their major, because it affects everything from health, if you want to think in terms of, allergens in the air and what triggers those, art history has ties to weather, political science, forensics. I mean, weather plays a role in just about everything. So there's always a way that, you could start with meteorology and then branch out into a more specialized area that suits you, or the other way around. Um,
And
and,
do
and
you
I'll go ahead and jump on the next question I see here, because this is there more field work or computer work or both? And I think that really is going to depend on what specialization and what area you want to get into. I mean, my job tends to be a fair mix of both, where we do. I do a lot of time in front of the computer, but then any chance I get, I'm out in the field where we're taking direct measurements and putting up instruments and doing specialized field studies looking at specific problems. So there can be a real solid mix between the two.
Right, and I would agree with that. And interestingly, it really depends on your emphasis. So, something like ecology has a lot of field work, and then kind of mathematical interpretation of the information. Whereas something like environmental engineering is more design and kind of engineering type work, which is maybe a little bit more computer work. And then there's everything in between those two. So it's really just what's of interest to you.
What explicitly makes Savannah River, a unique place and the best place to do this kind of work that you're doing? We saw that you were, working with Oak Ridge and also out, in the Savannah River. So, is the location and working at the National Laboratory an advantage for doing the work and research that you're completing?
Yeah, let me take a crack at that, because it's really interesting. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say it's the best place, because there's lots of good places, but it is a great place. And we were the first, Savannah River site was the first national environmental research park that was set up by the Department of Energy. So basically, it was areas of the site are set aside for environmental research. It was the first major DOE facility where they did a baseline ecological assessment to see what the impact of operating a large facility like this would be on its environment. That had never been done before. So we're standing on the shoulders of the giants who kind of had those initial ideas in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And then we have 310 square miles. And as Brian showed, it's mostly now pine forest, about 80% pine forest. So it's a pretty fantastic place. It also has University of Georgia Savannah River Ecology Lab that we can work with and collaborate with. So we get to, kind of work with university folks. And some of the Savannah River Ecology Lab professors and scientists, they call Savannah River site a green thumb on a sore hand, because if you look at a shot from space, there's this beautiful green circle in the middle of all this brown. And the green circle in the southeastern part of the United States is the Savannah River plant, the Savannah River site. So it's a pretty fantastic place to be able to work, and maybe the best.
And just being located in the Southeast, where we just have such extensive forests, is really interesting from a carbon perspective, because the Southeast is so forested. It's considered a very significant contributor to carbon sequestration and understanding the carbon dynamics for the nation as a whole. And so there's a lot of interest in understanding how can we, how do we affect the forests in terms of their ability to then affect carbon cycling? And so we are involved with anything from prescribed burns to just changing forest structure to best make sure we are maintaining that role in the forest for carbon.
Awesome. And I think someone was asking, what's the impact on, say, we've seen carbon sequestration, you're thinking about methyl mercury in water, but what are some other effects that you're trying to mitigate around, environmental contamination, or just helping us, the theme of today is invest in the earth. And so how is your work also helping us to figure out how we can best preserve, our forest, our water, and anything environmentally that we feel is very important to us?
A lot of the work that we do in the environment has to do with groundwater and surface water. So we haven't talked today much about it, but there's a lot of groundwater research that looks at how contamination is either held up or released from groundwater. Just as an example of how that comes into play, when they had the petroleum leak in Hawaii near Pearl Harbor, we actually got a call from the schools in the area, and we were working with the science teachers at the schools in Hawaii to kind of help the students understand, how dangerous it was and what they needed to be concerned about and what they might not need to be concerned about. And we got some feedback that it was really, really helpful to them to kind of understand how things were going to play out over the next few months. And I think the information we provided was really useful. But we do that with normal contaminants like petroleum hydrocarbons, with dry cleaning solvents like you would have in town, and with things that are specific to military bases and Department of Energy facilities. And we work at sites all around the country. So we love to collaborate with people and work with a lot of university scientists and a lot of high school and middle school as well.
Awesome. And Brian, I'll let you finish us with this last question.
Okay. Yeah. So, my thoughts is, I mean, what we were really interested in terms of maintaining the health of the forest and everything, I alluded a little bit to before, but we do a lot of work looking at how do we maintain the forest through prescribed burns, through understanding the forest structure, through understanding wanting to restore specifically the understory, the stuff that's right at the surface, because that plays an important role both in forest health and carbon cycle. And so there's a lot of work in trying to understand how can we best manage the forests in the southeast so that we can not only keep them around and make sure they're performing at their best efficiency, but also how can we just make sure that we're maintaining them in a way that they're going to be here for future generations, and all the wildlife and everything that is making use of it. And at Savannah River, one of the things that we actively take a role in is maintaining habitat for the red cockaded woodpecker in the region. And so there are teams of people out who are monitoring and looking for nests to make sure that those populations are thriving in this region.
Awesome. I want to thank our researchers from Savannah River National Laboratory for taking part in our national labs are celebrating Earth Day here for 2022. We greatly appreciate it.